World War I ended in 1918, but its effects were felt long after the fighting stopped, reshaping nations, redrawing borders, transforming the political and social structure of much of the world. Although the war was fought primarily in Europe, its consequences were global, influencing international relations for decades to come. One of the most immediate effects was the collapse of major empires, including the German, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires. From the ruins of these empires, new nations emerged, particularly in Eastern and Central Europe, with countries such as Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia being created or restored. However, many new borders were drawn without fully considering ethnic, cultural, or historical realities, leading to political instability and unresolved tensions in several regions. The political landscape of Europe was fundamentally altered by the conclusion of the Great War. The dissolution of four vast, multinational empires created a power vacuum and an opportunity for national self-determination, a principle championed by U.S. President Woodrow Wilson. In the wake of the fallen Austro-Hungarian Empire, nations like Austria, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia were established, while territories were ceded to create the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, later known as Yugoslavia. The collapse of the Russian Empire, hastened by the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, led to the emergence of independent states such as Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and a restored Poland. Similarly, the dismantling of the Ottoman Empire after centuries of rule resulted in the creation of modern Turkey and the establishment of French and British mandates over former Ottoman territories in the Middle East, including Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Palestine. This redrawing of the map was not a clean or simple process. The new borders, often decided by the victorious Allied powers, frequently ignored the complex ethnic and religious compositions of the regions they divided. For instance, the creation of Czechoslovakia brought together Czechs, Slovaks, and a significant German minority, while Yugoslavia became a volatile mix of Serbs, Croats, Slovenes, and other groups with distinct histories and aspirations. These arbitrarily drawn lines sowed the seeds of future conflicts, creating minority populations in new states, and fueling nationalist grievances that would persist for generations, ultimately contributing to instability in the Balkans and Central Europe. In 1919, the Treaty of Versailles formally ended the war between the Allies and Germany, placing full responsibility for the conflict on Germany and imposing severe penalties, including territorial losses, military restrictions, and heavy reparations. The treaty's infamous War Guilt Clause, Article 231, forced Germany to accept sole blame for initiating the war, a declaration that was met with universal outrage within the nation. The territorial consequences were significant. Germany lost Alsace-Lorraine to France, Eupen-Malmedy to Belgium, and large swaths of territory to the newly formed Poland, which created the Polish Corridor and isolated East Prussia. Furthermore, Germany's colonial empire was dismantled, and its territories were distributed among the Allied powers as League of Nations mandates. The treaty also imposed strict limitations on the German military, restricting its army to 100,000 men, forbidding the development of tanks, submarines, or an air force, and demilitarizing the Rhineland. Perhaps most damaging were the economic reparations, which were initially set at an astronomical sum. These measures caused economic hardship and deep resentment among the German population, and rather than securing lasting peace, they created conditions that would contribute to future conflicts. The punitive nature of the treaty was seen by many Germans as a national humiliation, a diktat or dictated peace. This pervasive sense of injustice was skillfully exploited by extremist political movements, including the Nazi Party, which used the treaty's terms as a powerful rallying cry to gain popular support. The economic strain of reparations payments crippled the Weimar Republic's economy, leading to hyperinflation in the early 1920s and making the country more vulnerable to the global economic crisis of 1929. Ultimately, the Treaty of Versailles failed in its primary objective of creating a stable and enduring peace, instead fostering an environment of anger and a desire for revenge that would directly contribute to the outbreak of World War II just 2 decades later. Economically and socially, World War I devastated Europe. Industries were destroyed, farmland damaged, and millions displaced. The sheer scale of the destruction was unprecedented. Entire regions, particularly in northeastern France and Belgium, were reduced to cratered moonscapes where towns and villages had once stood. Factories, railways, and bridges, all vital components of modern industrial economies, were obliterated, requiring immense investment and years of labor to rebuild. The agricultural sector was similarly crippled, as fertile land was scarred by trenches littered with unexploded ordnance and contaminated by chemical agents. This devastation, combined with the loss of agricultural workers to the war, led to widespread food shortages that persisted long after the armistice. The human cost was staggering, with an estimated 8.5 million soldiers killed and another 21 million wounded. Civilian deaths from military action, disease, and malnutrition exceeded 8 million. This massive loss of life, particularly of an entire generation of young men, created a demographic crisis and left a deep psychological scar on the continent. Millions of people were also displaced, becoming refugees in their own countries or fleeing across newly drawn borders, adding to the social and economic strain on already struggling nations. The social fabric of European society was profoundly transformed by the war. Social structures also changed significantly as women entered the workforce in large numbers, challenging traditional gender roles and accelerating demands for greater rights. With millions of men serving at the front, women stepped into roles previously considered the exclusive domain of males. They worked in munitions factories, on farms, as drivers, and in administrative positions, proving their capability and indispensability to the war effort. This newfound economic independence and social visibility fueled the women's suffrage movement, and in the years following the war, many countries, including Britain, Germany, and the United States, granted women the right to vote. The war also created a lost generation of traumatized survivors. At the same time, many veterans returned home to unemployment and limited support, increasing social unrest. They came back from the horrors of trench warfare, physically maimed and psychologically scarred by conditions like shell shock, now known as post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD). However, support systems were inadequate, and many veterans struggled to reintegrate into a society that little understood their experiences. This disillusionment and alienation contributed to political instability and social unrest in the post-war years, as veterans groups sometimes became recruiting grounds for radical political movements on both the left and the right. Globally, the war weakened Europe's dominance, allowing the United States and Japan to emerge as major powers. Before 1914, European empires controlled vast portions of the globe, and their economies dominated international trade and finance. The war shattered this supremacy. European nations emerged from the conflict deeply in debt, much of it owed to the United States, which transitioned from a debtor to a creditor nation. America's industrial might had grown significantly by supplying the Allies, and its late entry into the war meant it suffered far fewer casualties and no destruction on its own soil. This economic power translated into greater political influence on the world stage. Similarly, Japan, which had sided with the Allies, took advantage of the European powers' preoccupation to expand its own influence in East Asia and the Pacific. It seized German colonial territories and pushed for greater economic and political control over China. It also encouraged nationalist movements in colonized regions, particularly in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, where many groups began demanding independence and self-rule. The principle of self-determination, though unevenly applied in Europe, inspired colonial subjects to question the legitimacy of foreign rule. Millions of soldiers from the colonies had fought and died for their imperial masters in Europe, and their service and sacrifice led them to expect greater rights and autonomy in return. When these hopes were dashed, nationalist movements gained momentum. In India, leaders like Mahatma Gandhi began to mobilize mass movements for independence, while in Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh unsuccessfully petitioned the Versailles Peace Conference for his people's rights. In the Middle East, the betrayal felt over the Sykes-Picot Agreement and the Balfour Declaration fueled Arab nationalism and sowed the seeds of future conflict. Finally, the failure to establish a stable international system contributed to rising tensions in the 1920s and 1930s, setting the stage for World War II. The League of Nations, created at the Paris Peace Conference to prevent future wars through collective security and diplomacy, was fundamentally flawed from its inception. The refusal of the United States Senate to ratify the Treaty of Versailles meant that the world's newly emerged leading power never joined the organization, severely undermining its credibility and authority. Furthermore, the League lacked its own armed forces and had no effective mechanism for enforcing its decisions, relying instead on the goodwill and cooperation of its member states. It proved powerless in the face of aggression during the 1930s, failing to take meaningful action against Japan's invasion of Manchuria, Italy's invasion of Ethiopia, or Germany's rearmament and territorial expansion. This demonstrated weakness emboldened aggressor nations and eroded faith in the concept of collective security. The unresolved issues of the First War, including the harsh terms imposed on Germany, the frustrated nationalist ambitions in Europe and the colonies, and the economic instability of the Great Depression, all festered within this weak international framework. The fragile peace of the 1920s gave way to the rising militarism and expansionism of the 1930s as totalitarian regimes in Germany, Italy, and Japan sought to overturn the post-World War I order. In conclusion, World War I did not truly end in 1918. Its political, economic, and social consequences continued to shape the world for decades, and understanding its aftermath helps explain the causes of future conflicts and underscores the importance of building lasting peace. The year 1917 marked one of the most dramatic political transformations in modern Russian history, ending centuries of monarchical rule and reshaping both the nation and the global political landscape. The Russian Revolution was not a single event, but a series of interconnected crises fueled by deep economic hardship, political repression, social inequality, and the immense pressures of World War I. At the start of the 20th century, Tsar Nicholas II ruled as an autocrat with absolute authority. Political freedoms were minimal, opposition was often suppressed through violence or exile, and society was deeply unequal, with the vast majority of peasants living in extreme poverty, while a small aristocracy and nobility controlled most of the land and wealth. Industrial workers in rapidly growing cities faced harsh conditions, long hours, low wages, and exposure to dangerous machinery, while strikes and protests were common, but frequently met with brutal crackdowns. By the early 1900s, socialist ideas inspired by Karl Marx had gained influence, arguing that the working class would eventually rise to overthrow oppressive systems. And revolutionary groups, such as the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, advocated for a tightly organized party to seize power on behalf of the workers. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 worsened Russia's crises, as millions of poorly equipped and inadequately trained soldiers were sent to the front, suffering catastrophic casualties, low morale, and repeated military defeats, while at home, food shortages, inflation, and logistical failures caused widespread suffering among civilians. By early 1917, this growing unrest erupted into the February Revolution, when women workers in Petrograd, now St. Petersburg, led massive demonstrations demanding bread and better living conditions, joined by striking workers and rebellious soldiers. With the army refusing to fire on protesters, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated in March 1917, ending over 300 years of Romanov rule and collapsing the monarchy. Power shifted to a provisional government composed of liberal politicians and moderate socialists, which promised reforms and elections, but struggled to address the ongoing war, economic collapse, and food shortages. While grassroots councils, known as Soviets, emerged to represent workers and soldiers, often challenging the authority of the provisional government and creating a dual power system that undermined stability. The inability of the provisional government to enact meaningful change set the stage for the October Revolution, when Lenin returned from exile in April 1917 with the slogans "Peace, Land, and Bread," demanding an immediate end to the war, land redistribution to peasants, and transfer of power to the Soviets. By autumn 1917, the Bolsheviks had gained major influence in key cities, aided by leaders such as Leon Trotsky, and in November 1917, they seized strategic locations in Petrograd, including bridges, communication centers, and government buildings, culminating in the storming of the Winter Palace and the overthrow of the provisional government with relatively little violence. Lenin and the Bolsheviks established a government based on Soviet rule, one of their first actions being to withdraw Russia from World War I through the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in 1918, while redistributing land to peasants and placing industries under state control. These changes sparked opposition, leading to a brutal civil war between the Bolshevik Red Army and anti-Bolshevik forces, known as the Whites, which lasted several years and caused widespread suffering, though ultimately the Bolsheviks emerged victorious. In 1922, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or Soviet Union, was officially formed, marking the beginning of a new political era. The Russian Revolution inspired socialist and communist movements worldwide and alarmed governments that feared similar uprisings. While throughout the 20th century, the Soviet Union played a central role in global politics, influencing conflicts, alliances, and ideological debates. The events of 1917, particularly the February and October revolutions, represented a turning point in world history, ending centuries of monarchy, introducing a radical new political system, and demonstrating the profound impact of war, inequality, and public frustration in shaping social and political change, ultimately reshaping Russia and setting the stage for global developments that would reverberate for generations.